21st of September. Hare Krishna. Start as ever by chanting a little Jai Radha Madhava. Oh, and I actually received a complaint that my voice is not as loud as it should be, which is an unusual complaint for me. Anyway, I'll sit a little closer to the phone that I'm using to record the class. Okay, thank you very much. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Radhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. A reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 15, The Pandavas Retire Timely. And today we are reading text, if I'm not mistaken, text 41. So, Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 15, The Pandavas Retire Timely, it's text 41. Vācaṁ juhāva manasi tad prāṇa itare chatam mṛtyāv apānaṁ mṛtyāv apānaṁ sotsargaṁ tam pañcatve ajohavīt vācaṁ juhāva manasi tat prāṇa itare tam mṛtyāv apānaṁ sotsargaṁ tam pañcatve ajohavīt vācaṁ juhāva manasi tat prāṇa itare tam mṛtyāv apānaṁ mṛtyāv apānaṁ sotsargaṁ tam pañcatve ajohavīt vācaṁ juhāva manasi tat prāṇa itare tam mṛtyāv apānaṁ sotsargaṁ tam pañcatve ajohavīt vācaṁ vācaṁ speeches, juhāva relinquished, manasi into the mind, tat prāṇa mind into breathing, itare cha other senses also, tam into that, mṛtyāv into death, apānaṁ breathing, sotsargaṁ with all dedication, tam that, pañcatve into the body made of 5 elements, he certainly ajohavīt amalgamated it. Translation. Then he amalgamated all the sense organs into the mind, then the mind into life, life into breathing, his total existence into the embodiment of the 5 elements, and his body into death. Then, as pure self, he became free from the material conception of life. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada, Ki Jai. Maharaj Yudhishthira, like his brother Arjuna, began to concentrate and gradually became freed from all material bondage. First, he concentrated all the actions of the senses and amalgamated them into the mind. Or in other words, he turned his mind towards the transcendental service of the Lord. He prayed that since all material activities are performed by the mind in terms of actions and reactions of the material senses, and since he was going back to Godhead, the mind would wind up its material activities and be turned towards the transcendental service of the Lord. There was no longer a need for material activities. Actually, the activities of the mind cannot be stopped, for they are the reflection of the eternal soul. But the quality of the activities can be changed from matter to transcendental service of the Lord. Excuse me. The material color of the mind is changed when one washes it from contaminations of life breathing and thereby frees it from the contamination of repeated births and deaths, and situates it in pure spiritual life. All is manifested by the temporary embodiment of the material body, which is a production of the mind at the time of death. And if the mind is purified by practice of transcendental loving service to the Lord, and is constantly engaged in the service of the lotus feet of the Lord, there is no more chance of the mind producing another material body after death. It will be freed from absorption in material contamination. The pure soul will be able to return home, back to Godhead. Translation again. Then he amalgamated all the sense organs into the mind, then the mind into life, life into breathing, his total existence into the embodiment of the 5 elements, and his body into death. Then, as pure self, he became freed from the material conception of life. Om Ajana Timurandasha Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unitamyena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya manobishtam stapitam yena bhutale swaya rupa gadamayam dadati swabarante kam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jai. Krishna consciousness, Srila Prabhupada stressed so many times that Krishna consciousness is a scientific process, and you can really understand that or get the sense of that from today's translation and purport. This whole scientific process about how best to leave the body and amalgamating the activities into the mind into breathing into life, etc. You see that nice picture in the Bhagavad Gita where the yogi is leaving this world from the top of his head. We have nine gates in our body, if you like. The anus, the genital, the mouth, of course, the two ears, the two nostrils, and also the top of the head here, which for adults is kind of more or less solid. Of course, the top of the head is a relatively soft membrane, really, easily penetrated. But babies, when they're first born, just right here, on the crown of the head, if you like, there's literally a hole into the head of you. It's kind of like it hasn't merged or formed fully like that. So this is a hole also, and it's described that if the soul leaves, this is kind of yogic processes. If the soul leaves from here, it's the most auspicious way to leave. But either way, they're kind of details, and the main thing is that our consciousness is right when we're leaving. However, whichever route that the soul leaves the body from, that our consciousness is the right consciousness. And today's verse and purport is talking very much about that, and the mind, and how the mind, what does it say here? Actually, the activities of the mind cannot be stopped, for they are the reflection of the eternal soul, but the quality of those activities of the mind can be changed from matter to transcendental service. So in that sense, we cannot control the mind. Sorry, the mind isn't a bad thing. It's just a question of us transferring it from being a vehicle for material thought and material action, transforming it into a vehicle for spiritual thought and spiritual action. 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, that our mind can be our greatest friend or our worst enemy. It's our greatest friend when we're in control of it, and by being in control of it, that its activities are transcendental and spiritual. And it's our worst enemy when we're not in control of it, or when its thought process, its constant thinking, feeling, willing is all based on material life and material activities like that. Actually, the mind, one nice analogy I've heard is the mind is like a kite. And I don't know about you, but I tried flying kites once or twice, I think, as a kid, and I could never really get the hang of it. And of course, once it's up there and you don't have the hang of it, it just goes anywhere and everywhere. It can go way up, or it can just come crashing down, or get tangled, etc., etc. All sorts of crazy things can happen if you don't have control of that string that links the kite with its anchor and its reality, if you like. So the whole process of Krishna consciousness is the ability to, because you see other people when they fly kites, literally with their little finger or something, they can just control the whole process. They know exactly what they're doing, and the kite goes exactly where the person holding the thread wants it to go. So that's very much like our minds, that we have to learn to control them. If we don't learn to control, they go crazy, they go everywhere, and to places that aren't good for us and are not going to be to our benefit. But if we have a good tight rein over the thread that's linking us with the kite, then we can control it, a little pull or a little move this way or that way. We're in complete control like that. So that's the goal with the mind. Of course, the best way to control the mind is by engaging it in service. And in this age, as we know and have heard many, 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 many times, both the easiest and the best, which is a wonderful combination. It's not just that it's the easiest, which it is, but it's also the best, the most effective. So that combination is a wonderful combination. So the best way and easiest way to control the mind in this age of Kali Yuga, the age of hypocrisy and quarrel, is through the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And then we achieve what's been mentioned here in the verse and purport today, that then we become free from the material conception of life, and also the material colour of the mind is changed when one washes it from contaminations and frees it from the contamination of repeated births and deaths, and situates it in pure spiritual life. So that's what happens when we control the mind, and the best process for that is chanting Hare Krishna. And then, as Krishna tells us in the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, some nice verses, Anta Kale Chamam Eva Smaram Mukva Kale Varam, that whoever at the end of their life, so Anta Kale Chamam Eva, Smaram, remembering, Smaram Mukva, liberation, Kale Varam, and whoever at the end of this life, at the end of their life, which is coming, for all of us, it's coming, so whoever remembers at the end of his life, remembers Krishna, quits their body, leaves their body remembering Krishna, at once attains Krishna. Of this there is no doubt. Of this there is no doubt. Samshaya, no doubt. So that's the whole process, to get control of our mind, so as that it's not dictating to us what we're thinking at any point, and particularly at the time of death, but we're dictating to our mind what it's thinking about throughout our lives, and then obviously at the time when we're leaving the body, that we can be thinking of Krishna. Yam yam vapi smaram bhavam, smaran again, which is remembering. So yam yam vapi smaram bhavam, toyatante kalevaram, that whatever state of being one remembers when they quit their body, whatever state of being one is remembering when they quit their body. O son of Kunti, or Arjuna, that state they will attain without fail. They will attain that state without fail, whatever it is that they're remembering at the time of leaving the body. That's where they go, like that. Thinking, feeling, and willing. And then there's another one, Abhyas Yoga Yuktena Chetasananya Gamina. He who meditates on me, Krishna, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, their mind constantly engaged in remembering me, undeviated from that path, he, Arjuna, is sure to reach me. So that's the whole, or it should be, our whole focus in life. We know from the stories in Srimad-Bhagavatam, Prahlad Maharaj being maybe the best one, that from a very, very young age, preschool age, and certainly from 5 years of age, that's what Prahlad Maharaj was doing. Not just for himself, but was training all his school friends, etc., to do the same, or trying to train them to do the same, to control the mind, and then engage the mind in those activities that are beneficial to us. If the mind is uncontrolled, the mind will engage in all sorts of activities, and the chances are that 99%, if not 100% of those activities that the uncontrolled mind focuses on and engages in will be detrimental to our well-being, our spiritual well-being. It's just as simple, plain and simple as that. It's not a mystery at all. It's very, very clear and very, very plain. So in this chapter 15, what's kind of happening, and we can maybe do a summary of the chapter, that at the beginning Arjuna, he's grief-stricken and overwhelmed because Krishna is, as we've talked about many times, in his Vapu form, is effectively leaving now, departing. So Arjuna, he's grief-stricken, just as we've all experienced grief when a loved one leaves. Of course, there's a difference between our loved ones leaving and Krishna leaving, but still the principle is the same. That there's a feeling of, grief and despair, loss, all of those emotions, in the sense that we will, and this was also Arjuna, if you like, mistakenly thinking that somehow that never see that person again. In our situations, and from a material point of view, that's very true. But of course, on the spiritual platform, it's a different story. So, but anyway, the emotions are the same. So Arjuna was grief-stricken, essentially overwhelmed, and he was taking solace, if you like, or shelter, ashraya, shelter, in remembering his life with Krishna, if you like, and all the different pastimes that he had with Krishna. Of course, as he's thinking about those things, it kind of that impacts and increases his sense of loss now that that Krishna has apparently left. And then Arjuna, he's taking, as I say, solace and shelter in remembering Krishna as his friend, and the wonderful reciprocation throughout his Arjuna's entire life that he had with Krishna, and that reciprocation for Krishna that resulted in so much, honor and glory and meaning and purpose for Arjuna. It was just his whole life. Everything was his association and relationship with Krishna, and the incredible beneficial reciprocation that he received from Krishna, all because of his dependence on Krishna. The whole Bhagavad Gita is spoken from that point of view, that Krishna's explaining to Arjuna basically why eternal relationships are what is important, and temporary relationships are totally unimportant. And of course, after explaining that whole process and explaining who he is and why he's come, Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then of course the choice is given to Arjuna. He says to Arjuna, now you deliberate on what I've told you, what I've explained to you, and make your choice. So Arjuna's situation is non-different than ours, that we have all this philosophy, we have all this understanding. Now we deliberate on it, and we choose accordingly, choose what we think is the best thing to do. Quick look at the time. Okay. So that's how the chapter starts. Then Arjuna, he's recalling in his own mind, incident after incident about how Krishna empowered and protected him, as well as the other Pandavas. And of course we know all the trials and tribulations that they went through, the Pandavas and Queen Kunti, etc. It was just unbelievable, Duryodhan and, Duryodhan primarily, making all these plans to try to kill the Pandavas like that. And quite incredible. You can imagine, I suppose the modern day equivalent here in Dublin would be one of those crime gangs, after you and trying all sorts to try to, inflict pain, suffering and death on you and your family like that. So that was the experience that the Pandavas had, particularly, as I say, led by Duryodhana. And Arjuna now was recalling all of those incidences and how Krishna came to their aid and protected them at all time. So again, that's feeding into the loss that he's experiencing now from the point of view of thinking, if you like, that Krishna has actually left. And then Arjuna, he talks about the intimacy of the relationship that he had with Krishna, and how now, in the absence of Krishna, that he feels he's lost all his powers. And then he refers, a few translations ago, he's referring how, he was then defeated by just some insignificant cowherd men. Of course, that was all a pastime with some ladies, some denizens of heaven who, wanted to have the association of Krishna, etc. And they got the boon or the blessings from one great sage or one great muni, like that. But anyway, Arjuna's reflecting how, as a result, that would never have happened when he had Krishna by his side or was being fully empowered by Krishna, etc. But now that Krishna's left, he's feeling bereft of his support and his shelter, and his own powers have been reduced, and therefore he was, in his eyes, was defeated by these cowherd men. Actually, whenever I hear that phrase, cowherd, it always brings to mind the story of a person I heard some years back. His name was William Cowherd, and William Cowherd was a minister, a priest, if you like, in a place called Salford in Manchester. But this was like 250 years ago. You can just imagine what living conditions were like and life's general situations 250 years ago in northern Britain. You can Google and get descriptions of how, it must have been so hard for anyone to focus on anything other than just getting food in their mouth and getting somewhere to be warm and somewhere to sleep every night. Yet William Cowherd, as I say, he was a minister, a priest, a preacher, and he had a condition that anybody who wanted to be part of his church, part of his congregation, they had to sign a contract. For most of them, it probably just was their fingerprint, because most people wouldn't have been educated in those days. And the one condition to be part of his church was that they had to sign or put their fingerprint on a document saying that they would be a vegetarian, they would never eat meat again. And it's just so interesting, 250 years ago in northern Britain, this gentleman, that was his main preaching mission, which of course, as we understand, is a very basic part of Krishna consciousness, that we do not inflict suffering on other living entities. In addition to that, now in modern society, the economic reasons, the environmental reasons, as well as the health reasons, and then as well as the ethical reasons, it's becoming more and more popular and more understood that that's the diet that we should follow. So it's just interesting that 250 years ago, when none of this information would have been available, this is what this gentleman was doing. And actually it was the precursor to the Vegetarian Society being created in Britain. After his followers, William Cowherd's followers, created that. But what's just interesting is his name was Cowherd. I mean, there's no such thing. Nothing, not a blade of grass moves without the sanction of the Supreme. Nothing happens by chance. Everything in this world happens for a reason. So here we are, gentlemen, 250 or more years ago, when there would have been such little, if practically any, knowledge about the reason why someone should follow that diet. Here was a gentleman who happened to be a spiritual person, a religious person, and this is what he was promoting and preaching, and then he just happened to have the name Cowherd. It's just quite amazing. Anyway, so Arjuna again was lamenting his loss of Shakti, his loss of power, because again of the departure of Krishna. And then he relates the news of the destruction of the Yadu dynasty, and of course, this is all just adding to his grief. But then he focuses on remembering Krishna's instructions, and as a result of remembering Krishna's instructions, he then sort of snaps out of his grief and panic, if you like, because of Krishna's apparent departure, because he starts remembering Krishna's instructions. And as a result of remembering Krishna's instructions, he again becomes situated in transcendence, beyond the modes of nature. 3 material modes of nature. Top one, goodness; middle one, passion; lower one, ignorance. And this is exactly what's being stated here in today's translation. That after the amalgamation of the sense organs into the mind into life into breathing, and then into the total existence of the embodiment of the 5 elements, which is the body, that's embodying the 5 material elements, and then the body into death, then as pure self, one becomes free from the material conception of life. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions that what that actually means is, just trying to find it, all is manifested by the temporary embodiment of production of the mind, and the mind is purified by practice of transcendental loving service of the Lord, constantly engaged in the service of the Lord. There is no chance of the mind's producing another material body after death. I missed it actually. It's somewhere where it says that it transcends the 3 modes of material nature. So that's what Arjuna was doing, and by instructions of Krishna, he again was situated in transcendence and was able to completely free himself from the effects, or the grip, if you like, of the three modes of material nature. So this was the whole focus, if you like, of this whole chapter of the Pandavas retiring timely, Arjuna retiring here now, and also Yudhisthira, etc. And after hearing from Arjuna, actually, both Yudhisthira and Kunti, they also decided, this was the right thing to do, decided basically to go back to Godhead. And then it's philosophically explained about the disappearance of the Yadus, Yadu dynasty, and the Supreme Lord, because these are incredibly extraordinary pastimes, actually. So it's then explained, about the how the fratricidal war started and all of that, and the conclusion being that Krishna, he's always here, he's always a constant. Whether he's manifest before us, that we can directly see him with our eyes, that's another thing. But the fact is that Krishna is always present. Whether we can, directly and immediately see him or not, that's besides the point. But Krishna is always eternally present, and as we've discussed many times, not least in the heart of every living entity of Paramatma. And Prabhupada gives the example of the two birds in the tree. One is the super soul, one is the individual soul, us. And the individual soul, us, we can look straight past Krishna, we can look the other direction away from Krishna, we can look behind Krishna, etc. And then we won't see him, and therefore we will think he's not there. But of course we just have to turn and look at Krishna directly, then we can see, and then we can be in his association. But if we don't do that, it doesn't mean that Krishna's not actually present. And then it talks about Kali entering the scene. We've talked a lot about that. And because that's happening, Maharaj Yudhisthira at that point, he decides to hand the throne over to Maharaj Parikshit. And as this has been explained here, he then chooses to free himself from the material conception of life. And this is real glory, to be able to do that you're engaged in so-called the real world, as Maharaj Yudhisthira, as the king and as the emperor. He's engaged very much in the real world. But you understand that you're doing that, and Maharaj Yudhisthira, of course, in the role of Kshatriya or warrior, like that. So whatever our nature, whether we have, a more brahminical nature, which is inclined to philosophy and teaching and all of those things, or whether we have a Kshatriya nature, which is inclined towards protecting the citizens, administration, all of those, organization of society, all of those kind of things, whether we have a Vaishya nature, which is business and farming and all of that, or whether we have a Sudra nature, which is doing all the practical work, if you like, that society requires to function in a normal way. Whatever nature we have and whatever we're engaged in, the idea is we understand we're doing it as a service to Krishna, and that allows us then, when we're getting older and the time to retire, that allows us to be to leave it in a detached way, because we're doing it for the right reasons. And that's exactly what Maharaj Yudhisthira is doing here now, and he simply hands over. You look at so many, it seems to happen in Africa, at least nowadays, more than other places in the world, although other places too, I think. But you have leaders who just can't let go. They're like, I think the chap in Zimbabwe at one point, I think he's passed away now, but I think he was 98. I think he was 98, and he was standing for election. Of course, elections are essentially, I think, rigged. I don't think there's any chance of losing, but still, 98, and you're standing for election. This is attachment, big time attachment to your material situation. But Maharaj Yudhisthira here, he was handing over to Maharaj Parikshit to become to succeed him, because the time now had come in his life for him to enter stage left, I think is the phrase that's used. So Yudhisthira was entering stage left and going into the next stage of his life, which was preparing for leaving this world in the best possible consciousness, as we discussed at the beginning. So that's where we are with this, both this verse, but also this chapter up to this point that Krishna has left some time back, and now all of these great personalities, who all incidentally descended when Krishna came in this particular pastime that Krishna was performing 5,000, a little bit more than 5,000 years ago. They came as part of that. You know, that's all described in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, in the Krishna book, how once Krishna was coming and his appearance was imminent, all these incredible personalities appeared along with him to participate in this whole incredible pastime that was about to take place. But now that Krishna's left and gone on to perform other pastimes, etc., they're also leaving as well. But their leaving is so instructive for us as to how best for us to leave this world, which, as I say, every time, practically speaking, that I speak, mention that, and that's just around the corner for every single one of us. That's another thing Prabhupada talks about a lot, you know. Don't think there will be time, sometime in the future, to focus on this. No, you start right now focusing on this, and you start by doing two things. Your daily activities that you perform, whatever they may be, as we've just discussed, whether they're, you know, Brahmanically inclined, Kshatriya inclined, Vaishya inclined, Sudra inclined, you do them as a service to Krishna. And then the other thing you do, whatever spare time that you get. And if you don't get any spare time during the day, try to get up a little bit earlier. Whatever spare time you have in the day, you chant Krishna's holy names, because that's the best way, as I mentioned, to control the kite being the mind, you know, have good control of that string, and it doesn't flap and wave and go here, there and everywhere. No, you have good control of it, and the best way to have control of that is by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, and then Yam Yam Bhapi Smaram Bhavam, that at the time of death we can think of Krishna, and if we can think of Krishna at the time of death, that's exactly where we go. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.